Kayla, happening right now at the White House, the opposition leader for Venezuela, Machado, is there. Tell us about what we know so far. Why is this not an open meeting?
Yeah, so it sounds like this meeting has been going on for about 40 minutes or so. That's what we just heard from the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. But Machado is going into this meeting with huge expectations. As you noted, it is a closed meeting, so it's not open to press. But she is going in there trying to make the case to President Trump that she should be a part of Venezuela's future after he notably disregarded her in the moments after capturing Maduro, saying she did not have the respect of the country despite receiving more than 90% by some estimates of support from Venezuelans in 2023. And so she's going in there trying to make that case. But right now, it sounds like the White House is very happy to be working with Delcy Rodriguez, who was Maduro's number two. And of course, they have said Maduro was an illegitimate president, and yet they continue to work with his regime. So that continues to be a real tension here. And we have not heard any urgency from President Trump for elections to be held there. He says that the U.S. could have oversight of Venezuela for potentially years. And so she has really high expectations to make the case that there should be elections very soon and that she should be someone who should be considered for the future leader of the country.
All right, we'll see if there's any news coming out of that after the meeting wraps up. Regarding Iran, the United States already bombed Iran, bombed the nuclear sites. The president has been threatening to get involved if the Iranian regime kills more protesters. Yesterday, the president, Philip, said that he was given word from authority that they would stop doing that. Has that been the case?
Well, it looks like from what we are hearing on the ground from the people we are able to speak to that these protests have largely now been smothered. There are no reports of fires, for example, in the capital city, Tehran, no reports of gunfire either, indeed no signs of protests. It's been exactly 1 week now since the worst of the government crackdown happened in several Iranian cities. That is also when the internet and phone blackout started. And that is also when the death count, of course, started to go up. According to activists, it now stands at 2,637 people who've died during these protests. That number is expected to go up pretty much on a daily basis as dead bodies are counted. Now, what we saw from the White House, though, is a term that you mentioned just a short while ago. It's an off-ramp. In diplomatic speak, that means for the U.S. president, it is a way out of a red line that he himself created. Here in the region, the big question is still, will he or won't he? Well, he's now given himself the opportunity to not intervene despite the threats to do so. Remember that he had said that red line was going to be a violent crackdown of protests, exactly what happened. Later on, he said that there would be a big U.S. intervention if there were to be executions. Now, he says that those executions have been stopped, maybe through his help. And indeed, we do not have any reports from Iran right now of any executions having happened so far. So in the absence of a military intervention that people here in the region are still thinking is possible, what has the White House reaction been so far? Well, economic moves, essentially. Those tariffs that were imposed, 25% tariffs on countries who have business dealings with Iran. And just today, the announcement of new sanctions on 18 people and companies who either, these individuals, were part of the repression and made those orders, gave those orders for the violent crackdown, and also people involved in those sanctions who are accused by the United States of money laundering. So that so far has been the U.S. reaction, and that is a pretty serious disappointment to a lot of protesters who believe that they need outside help, that they cannot topple the regime by themselves.
Yeah, I'm a little bit taken aback, Philip, by what you reported at the top there, which is that a day ago, as we were watching everything on fire and seeing families discovering and identifying their loved ones in body bags, that today there's just no protests on the street. How can that be?
Well, there are many good reasons why people would be very afraid to go out and protest after what happened over the last few days. There have been, of course, warnings, and most of those sent out by text message, the only way of communication over the last few days, essentially, in Iran. Text messages from the regime saying people should not be out there protesting. And of course, they know now what could happen to them, that this is a very violent crackdown. Indeed, it is the most violent there has been in Iran since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. The death toll significantly higher than during any other protest movement in Iran, and there have been quite a few. Those are pretty good reasons for protesters to be afraid to go back on the streets.
Yeah, I'm surprised that it would stop so suddenly and abruptly after there was so much momentum and so much anger. But I understand what you're saying. Phil, thank you. All right, Inez, you're in Greenland, and we started off this show by talking a little bit more about Greenland and the reaction from Congress. We've heard vocally from a few Congress members, including some prominent senators. But a lot of these folks are folks that are retiring, so we're going to take it all with a grain of salt. What is happening today in Greenland as this conversation continues on, as Donald Trump makes it very clear that he's not going to accept anything else other than full control of Greenland?
Yeah, I mean, people here are worried. They are taking a kind of, I think, wait-and-see approach at this point. We heard from the Danish Prime Minister that there were really no breakthroughs coming out of that conversation yesterday that Rubio and Vance and Danish and Greenlandic officials had. We understand that she described those talks as talks that were not easy. And we heard from the Danish Foreign Minister as well, saying that, it's been quite emotional for Denmark to have to face this kind of pressure from one of its closest and oldest allies, the U.S., and that there remain some fundamental disagreements between the U.S. and Denmark. There has been a kind of military buildup in Greenland in the last 24 hours. So we know that, we're learning more about the resources that are being sent to Denmark. We know the Danes have sent troops already. They said today they would be sending even more troops. We're also learning that France, Sweden, Norway, the Netherlands, Germany are all planning to send resources, that they're going to be holding joint military exercises in and around Greenland. We went out to try and find some of these recently arrived troops and resources. We did find 2 Danish Navy ships. I will say, from doing some research, it looks like these are ships that are typically stationed around Greenland. So it's unclear if those ships are part of the reinforcements. It's unclear how long they've been here, where they came from. But I did speak to a Danish naval officer who told me that in his 37 years of doing this job, he has never seen a Russian or Chinese warship in Greenlandic waters. And yet President Trump, right after that meeting, in his first remarks following that meeting in D.C. yesterday, doubled down on his argument that he needs Greenland for national security reasons, saying that, if China and Russia were to take Greenland, that there's not a thing that Denmark can do about it, is what he said. So clearly Denmark, European allies, in the last 24 hours, wanting to prove the president wrong on that front, wanting, to show that they stand squarely with Denmark, and showing that they can boost security in the Arctic.
All right, Inez, thank you. It looks cold out there, so I'll let you go. I appreciate that. Max, let's focus on the totality here. We're talking about Venezuela. We're talking about threats to Iran. We're talking about Greenland. Help me understand them all together.
Well, this is a bizarre turn, Katie, as you mentioned, that Trump, who has a reputation as being kind of a neo-isolationist, somebody who was opposed to nation building, who talked about how he was going to measure the success of his presidency by all the wars that he ended and didn't start. That Donald Trump has now morphed into a 21st century American imperialist. And, he obviously used force 7 times against various countries, against 7 different countries in 2025, culminating, of course, in the operation at the beginning of the new year to take out Maduro in Venezuela. And, he seems to have been emboldened by that. Now he is, making military threats against Cuba, Mexico, Colombia, and of course, Greenland. And that is, truly bonkers, because you can see, some support and some logic to taking out Nicolas Maduro, who's truly a bad guy, who really is implicated in drug dealing, who's wanted in the U.S. Under an indictment. So, you can justify seizing Maduro just as you could justify seizing Manuel Noriega in Panama in 1989. But there is no justification for attacking a NATO ally to seize its territory. That is the most un-American thing I can possibly imagine. And yet Trump also seems to have his mindset on that. And also, by the way, we're not talking about it, but He's taking Venezuela's oil. Again, you can justify the operation to take Maduro, but what is the legal or strategic justification to take Venezuela's oil and to park the proceeds in offshore accounts in Qatar, which seems to be what the administration is doing? I just don't get that at all. It makes no sense, and it's contrary to international law. It's contrary to American traditions. I don't think this is what most Americans want or expect, even Trump's followers. But President Trump seems completely unrestrained, both at home and abroad.
The administration argues that the world is different today than it was 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, that the threats are bigger and more serious, that China is a giant threat, Russia or potentially, another nation could threaten the strength and the safety of this country, and that in order to make us stronger, make us wealthier, make us continue another century of dominance, as we've had for the last century, that they have no choice but to assert themselves in these ways in our region, and also to assert themselves the way they've been doing in the Middle East. Do you see any success with any of these moves, or does that make sense to you at all?
I mean, I think the administration is right to point to growing threats from China and Russia and other powers, including Iran and North Korea. But the answer is pretty simple. We have to work with our allies. America standing alone is not going to be able to stand up to every rogue nation in the world, certainly not a country like China that has a much larger population and that is rapidly eclipsing us in economic and perhaps even military power. We need to work with our allies. And unfortunately, President Trump's instincts run against that. He's the ultimate unilateralist. And, he seems to be willing to risk a crack-up of NATO in order to seize Greenland, which America doesn't need. There is no conceivable reason why we need to own Greenland when we already defend Greenland as part of NATO. And Denmark has made clear we can put as many troops there as we want. We can negotiate as many deals to extract minerals as we want. There's no obstacles to doing anything we want in Greenland. We don't need to own it. But by trying to take ownership of it, President Trump is risking a crisis with NATO. And who's going to be the big beneficiary of that? It's going to be Russia. I mean,